everyone. Welcome to How to Be a Dungeon Master. I am here with a very special guest. This is Beth the Bard. Now, you may know Beth the Bard. If you don't, you will after this, and you should definitely be following her. Beth is a professional dungeon master. That is correct. A professional dungeon master, a writer who also specializes in therapeutic tools, roleplay, and neurodivergent accessibility, which you know are all topics very close to my heart. Also, very curious about Beth's feminist reimagining of Curse of Strahd, which is a best-selling DMs Guild title for good reason. I'm going to go ahead and guess. I discovered Beth the Bard on a wonderful Instagram channel called The Women of D&D, where very amazing, talented, diverse group of content creators in the D&D community are profiled. And I read Beth's profile and a short interview and was like, yes, we must be friends and we must be talking about dungeon mastering. So thank you so much for being here, Beth the Bard.
Thanks for having me.
There are so many things that I want to dig in with you. It was very hard to narrow things down. So as we just talked about prior to this interview, you're going to have to come back because you're doing a lot of great work. Also, you're a professional dungeon master, so I think that's kind of interesting to our audience. But what I wanted to focus on is your work that you have that you do when it comes to creating safe spaces with your D&D groups, maybe because a lot of those groups are kids and teens, and also the tools that you use that help with that group cohesion, which I think is a really important part, and one of the great benefits of playing D&D is feeling that connection with your groups. And as a dungeon master, you can help foster that. So, I mean, where to begin, Beth, but possibly like if people aren't familiar with the concept of safety tools and creating safe spaces, maybe like why are these things important?
Yeah, so I think they're mandatory, honestly, especially and nowadays we know that these are there. And there's a lot of talk about them. There's free resources. Definitely look up Monty Cook's. Hold on, I got to get this right. Monty Cook's. There's a free guide to using safety tools. Excellent stuff. But yeah, it's really important because it creates that sense of safety for the group and and for the dungeon master too. Like there's a lot of times when I'm really glad that we went over safety tools ahead of time and made these lines and veils and such for my sake as well, because, you know, we're all playing together.
Yeah, that is true. A lot of times I think when people think about the safety tools, they're always thinking about the dungeon master creating that safe space for players, but you're absolutely correct. The dungeon master is also a part of this and shall also be protected and be able to have their boundaries and be respected in that way as well. Respect your dungeon master. One of the things that you said in that profile also was that a lot of times the players that you're playing are a reflection of yourself. And so it can sometimes be hard for, to separate exactly, the things that happen in game and leaving them in the game. And as opposed to like what's
it feels
happening
like,
in real life.
It's an extension, a lot of especially when you're working with kids, it's an extension of themselves. It's something they've created that they're very passionate about. I mean, adults too.
Right.
I just work a lot more with kids and I see this firsthand where they're like, they've poured their little hearts into this. And then, that's why one of my big safety tools. So I could talk about safety tools all day, but like, and house rules. One of my house rules is no player versus player. We are not allowed to attack each other. We are not allowed to steal from each other. This includes if you guys go do a job and they pay 100 gold. Before I implemented this rule, I'd have kids be like, okay, I take it for myself. And everybody else is like, wait, what? And I'm like, okay, we're not going to do that. And so I started implementing into our session 0 house rules chat. So I could be like, we talked about this. Makes it easier. So no stealing from each other. And there are certain situations, however, where consent comes into it, because they might be just being like funny with each other. And they're like, oh, I just want to like, pop them with a stick for doing this thing, and I have to read the table, and it's like, okay, well, as long as there's no damage and things like that, and there is enthusiastic consent to this, the other player will be like, absolutely, this will be hilarious. Like, do this thing. And it's like, okay, let's roll for it. But if the other player is like, I guess, it's like, oh, nope, that was not enthusiastic consent. And we go with the basis of no, like it's no, unless it's enthusiastic. So that's one of those big important parts for me.
That's really interesting. So like, consent versus enthusiastic consent, because I see how kids might feel a little bit pressured to go along with something. Like, okay,
they don't want to be like, pushing it. And it's not one of those things where you point it out either like, oh, you were not enthusiastic, so we're not going to do this. I'm feeling it out. And then I, as the dungeon master, I'm like, you know what? I'm not feeling it. Let's not do it. Let's try this instead. And then redirect the attention really dramatically, very quickly.
Oh my God. I can feel the relief that from the player to hear the dungeon master be like, nah, I'm not feeling it. You're taking that.
You take the responsibility of the decision. And then, that's exactly.
That's amazing. And like, I mean, the topic of consent in general is even like outside of a D&D game is an important one. And that is hopefully when things that they are learning about their D&D party and about consent in game is going to follow them into their real life as
into
well.
Adulthood. They're going to be like, wait, I remember that that's consent, unless enthusiastically given, is a no. It's like,
that is not enthusiastic. Love it. So just curious, because you do work a lot with kids, and when they're creating their characters, do you notice that they tend to gravitate towards creating characters that embody a lot of themselves? Or are they the opposite? Are they just like, I'm going to be someone totally, totally different?
It's what I've noticed with kids, it's an extension of them. What I've noticed is it's an extension of them in a bigger, more grand way. Like, I am this big masculine fighter character, and I can do all these amazing things. Or I have this one kid who loves to play detectives, like Sherlock Holmes style. Did every campaign this kid has done with me. They're like, I can see everything. I understand it all. I'm good at solving puzzles. And so it's like, I can see that these are the things they're wanting. Whereas when I work with adults, it's usually like, well, this is the wacky side of this part of my personality, and I'm going to channel it into a character and go wild with it.
Yeah.
So
I could see that. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Okay. So one of the other, I'm just keep referencing this profile, which was really rather, they're short bits of content, but they're jam-packed with good information. But one of the things you talked about was this concept of group backgrounds and how that can lead to creating more cohesion among the group and safe spaces. But I need to know more about what this means. What are group backgrounds?
Absolutely. So when you come to a new campaign, you come with a character, and most of the time, at least with the groups I work with, they also come with pages of backstory for this character, really well thought out stuff.
They just are inspired to create that.
They're so excited. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
And so I get these like pages of backgrounds to work with and things like that for going forward into the campaign. But what I like to do is, because it's very important to me that our group is immediately a team. That's why, no player versus player. We need to be a team. We need to work together. I can't have you coming in here like, I'm a rogue and I don't want to talk to anybody. It's like, how can we do that in a way where we're still being good team members, like Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, who's a rogue, has his own agenda, but still is a great team player.
Right.
And so the group background thing, it helps mesh them together. It's like, okay, so this is what I'm hearing about you. This is what I'm hearing about you. How can we bring you guys together? What is, tell me about a quest that you two or you three, went on together previously. And then they're like, we didn't. It's like, no. Like, we're making it up right now. Like, tell me, we're going to talk about right now. Let's make up a story. What did you save that manticore kitten from a tree together? That's amazing. Tell me about it. things like that. So creating that group background separate from just coming in and this is me and my story. It's like, how are we making our story going into this? And it doesn't have to immediately be from session 1. I like to try and put in those hooks in session 1, session 0, more like. Sometimes I can't have a whole session 0. So it's like a discussion as part of session 1. So it's like, how can we go forward immediately with some group background so that you already know each other,
Mm-hmm.
you already appreciate each other, but you can do it going forward too. So I run a gender bent Curse of Strahd campaign, and 2 of my characters, they're both from the 9 hells. And so they're like, oh, okay, now we grew up best friends. Done. Okay, that
Love
is
it.
part of it. 2 of my other players in the campaign, we're 10 sessions in, and they've just decided, I think we might be from the same domain in Ravenloft, and we didn't know it until it's like, oh, let's dig into that a little, shall we?
Nice.
So it can be ongoing.
And having those connections with the other players obviously also helps build trust, which then helps create that safe space that is so important. I had a dungeon master, like the second dungeon master I ever had, did that, like asked us all to figure out how we knew at least one other party member. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. Like instant connection. Like we are already friends. We are already bonded. And I just like our characters were very, very, close in the game, and it helped us as a party of real people become closer in real life too. So it
like breaks the ice.
It really does. Yeah. And just the way that you're asking those questions, like, tell me about a time that you guys had this little adventure. Like you're also easing them into the role playing part, which can also be really scary for people. So, I mean, again, it's just all laying that groundwork, which is amazing. I love it. So cool. You also mentioned the yes and approach, which is a tool that most dungeon masters do like to keep in their toolbox. But how do you use that also to create safe spaces?
So that is, and I referenced a lot working with kids because that's what I do. But I noticed there's a big difference with this particular thing when working with adults and working with kids. When I'm working with my adult players, one of them will be like, I'm going to do this thing. And the other players are like, ooh, I'm going to quiet down for a minute and we're going to see what happens there. And this is going to be wild. With kids, this is a really, really big thing. Somebody will say like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And another kid almost always jumps in. No, don't do that. Do it this way. That's not smart. Do it this way. And it's like, ooh, oof. Ooh,
right.
Ooh. So as part of session 0, so that rather than having to explain in the moment, oh, we don't talk to each other that way, we use the spirit of yes and things like that. I try to cover that in the session 0. So all I have to do is go, yes and. And they're like, oh, sorry. And then they kind of fix it themselves. But, don't, I like to use a show, don't tell type of thing with this. If we're adding on to the yes and the no but thing, like, hey, I'm going to open this door, rather than as the player saying, no, don't do that. That's not smart. You need to check for traps, things like that. It's like, no. They are opening the door. As a character, you can say, hey, buddy, let's check for traps real quick.
Right.
Or you can say, while they're going to open the door, can I do a quick perception check to look for traps? Things like that, like adding on to the situation instead of shutting it down. Because sometimes with kids, especially, they come in and they're nervous to talk. Even if they want to be there, they're nervous to speak up and they're nervous to do things. And a lot of times I've got kids that aren't even necessarily there because they chose to be there, but their parents are like, hey, this is good for you. You're going to try it. And so they're like, that extra reluctance. And then when they finally speak up, to have somebody be like, no, it's like, no, this is a safe space. Our ideas are all valid. We're going to add on to them instead of taking them away.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And I always talk about this too. Like, I feel super intimidated in games, even when I'm playing with my friends sometimes, that like, I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to open a door and it's blatantly like riddled with traps and I just didn't see it because me, the player in real life, just forgets to do those things. So I like the idea of encouraging the party to, in game add on to the action that may be taking place, or like assisting, like, oh, I'm going to jump into this conversation and I'm going to, instead of telling the player how to do it. That's a really important distinction, because I would feel terrible if the people I was playing with were like, Shelly, oh, there's probably a trap. Oh no, she's going to trigger a trap. As opposed to like, oh, I'm going to sneak up behind her and like just look over her shoulder and make sure there's no traps. Ah,
Exactly.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Yes, big important distinction there for sure. I tend to even play characters now that like are just kind of like flighty, impetuous, like that are just
Same.
prone to making bad decisions, because one, it's actually really fun to play a character like that. But two, like, if I do mess something up, it's like, of course the character would have done that. That's who she is. I mean, come on. You can't expect her to like actually sweet talk a guard. She's just gonna walk in. Because I don't want to talk to the guard. But anyway, so the other thing that I was impressed and appreciated that you do in your games is that you make a point of incorporating diverse characters and introduce them as NPCs throughout the game. Like you mentioned, if you play with, are your groups, do you have groups that are all male?
I do.
Okay, so like introducing strong female characters into the
Incidentally,
games.
my all male groups are in my like gender bent Curse of Strahd campaign, where it's like
Really?
80% women. Oh yeah. So I'm like, hey, cool.
Amazing.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I think it's really important to I again, like the safety tool, I think it's mandatory to make sure your NPCs are diverse.
Right.
I mean, and it doesn't have to be like some big thing. They're just a character and you just describe them real quick. Hey, this is what they look like. This is, if they use like a wheelchair, you see their chair, and then they're like an NPC, like every other NPC. They just happen to be different than the people you're playing with or use different tools. I think that people make a really big deal out of diversity in games. It's like, it's not.
It shouldn't be.
You put it in. It's
yeah.
Like you don't use like caricaturized voices or things like that. Like don't do that. Just add diverse characters.
And you shouldn't make a point of being like, and now the boss comes in and she's a woman and she is very strong and very powerful. Like, no, it's just like, okay, so like their boss comes in and she's her name is this, and if there's any distinguishing characteristics that are important for the players to know, say that. But I always find myself, like, especially I have an 8-year-old boy, and I'm always like, I would find myself a lot of the times trying to like put like, no, like look at these strong women characters, and like play with your Harley Quinn action figure and not just, whatever. But he actually does have a Harley Quinn action figure and he loves her and he does play with her a lot. But I was finding myself being like too overt, where it was coming off like disingenuous, or like I was like, the way I was putting these things in front of him was making it too obvious that they were different, like.
Yeah, just make it a normal part of the system. Yeah, this is just it now.
Now you have like a collection of action figures and half of them are female. Great. Cool. No bigs. Like it'll just become inherent. So
exactly.
But like doing that in your games as well, I think is super cool. And then the world building. So is this also something that you involve your characters in? Is that part of creating their backstories?
So world building happens as we go.
Okay.
Like if we're playing an already established game with an already established world, I mean, it's there, but as we're moving forward with this, just happened last night. I think there was some world building together. And it's not necessarily the world itself. It's like collaborative storytelling that makes the story unique to the group. So we move forward and they'll have an idea or they'll think of something. I'm going to give 2 examples. So the first one happened last night. You know, my players were, this was my streaming game. They went to kill this baddie and they're like, I'm gonna do the sword thing and I'd like to like cut off their head. And I'm like, well, they're not dead yet, so that's not gonna work. And then I was like, no, we're gonna world build this together. It's like, okay, you do. And its headless body keeps like moving towards you for the next attack. It's like, okay, so now we've got this creature in this world now that can do that. Maybe it's a reborn or something like that. But we just built that together. It's our story because they were like, yeah, do it.
Oh, I love it.
Rolling with that. Or a few days ago, we're at the end of a Lost Mine of Phandelver campaign. And these kids were, you know, running through the forest to try and find this mine with Gundren, the dwarf, you know, and they had just dealt with a changeling a little bit ago. And as they're walking along and chatting, they're like, what if Gundren is like one of these shapeshifters? And I'm sitting there to myself and I'm like, well, he's not. But then they started getting so excited about it and talking about it. And they're like, yeah, because he did this and he did this and this happened. And I was like, those are really good points. You guys picked. Oh, so I'm like sitting over here and I'm like, okay, he's a shapeshifter now. Okay. So then they went in for it and they're like, okay, we're going to interrogate him about it. We're going to go after it. And so I was like, okay, he steals your key and he runs off and they're like, no, go get him. You know?
That's so cool.
Like, in that moment, we changed the world and the story together. Because they were just so excited. I was like, how could I not lean into that?
No, that's amazing. And I like that you also validated that, like empowered them, like made them feel like, yeah, the knowledge that you picked up on, like you sussed it out, kids. Like
even though I didn't pick up on that because I don't plan that well. they imagined the scenario and it felt really good to them. And I was like, it's on.
That is brilliant. All right, one of my last questions, and then if there's anything that you want to add, we can certainly do that. But when you're playing with lots of different personalities, different people, how are you? Because obviously, like we've talked about, some of them are going to be more comfortable with role playing, and with wanting to be more like part of the story than other people. But how do you? What do you do if you notice like a player is maybe a little quieter or is seeming to be a little bit more intimidated by the action? How do you help bring that person more to the forefront?
So there's a few ways to approach that. I haven't experienced it with my adult groups yet because everybody in those groups is I play with a lot of bards, I think.
Oh, definitely not a problem there.
But my kids, so I have to take everything into account. Sometimes a parent will message me and they'll say, hey, my kid is joining. They are nonverbal. They want to just sit in and they want their character to be here. They created a character and they want it to be there and they want to watch the story and just be on Zoom with other kids, but they're not going to actually involve themselves and they're going to feel really bad if you try to force it. And I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
So, I will say at least 2 of those kids that were put in my groups like that started talking and interacting with the groups fully by session 5 or 6. Just throwing that out there. Absolutely wild. Yeah.
Did they take that outside of the game as well? Were they more talkative?
Well, because these kids, they were verbal at home, but not at school.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were talking in our sessions, and I know one of the parents reached out and was like, hey, they're starting to talk more like in their classroom and stuff as well. And I'm like, oh my God, D&D is beautiful. It's so therapeutic.
Oh my God.
But until that moment comes, it's like, I'm not going to pressure you, but I'm going to make sure that your character still gets some spotlight. So I kind of I'll play them a little bit like an NPC. Hey, your baby dragon character does this thing. Do you like that? And they're like, yeah, Go for it.
Oh, cool.
Whereas other kids, they're in there and they're just feeling a little more shy. I try not to do like the random calling on them if I feel like they've got that anxiety.
Yeah.
Some kids, they're like, I'll call on them, I'll feel it out, and they jump in as soon as they feel like they have that permission.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I can do that with you. So I keep track of that. Other kids are like, and I'm like, you know what? Never mind. Switch subjects, and then I know that they don't like that. And so I try to use a different approach, kind of like using in situations where, I want to make sure everybody's getting involved. I'll use more like initiative mode outside of combat, where it's like, I will be calling on you after this amount of time. And that seems to be like the winner because they've got that time to prep. It's not just a random, oh, hey, you. And they're like, ah.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of like, the surprise, like, oh, I don't know when the spotlight's going to shift to me. I can see that would be a little bit scary. But yeah, knowing when your turn is coming.
Yeah. And then they still, it's like, hey, what do you want to do here? And they're like, I don't know. It's like, totally fine. Do you want me to come back to you? Yeah. Come back to me. It's like, okay.
Do you ever narrow it down and give them like, do you want to do this or that? Does
absolutely. Because a lot of times they'll be like, I don't know what I can do here. It's like, okay, well, trying to think of an example, they're about to fight a baddie. It's like, okay, well, you can jump in if you want to start initiative. You could try to sneak out this way and go look for more clues. You could, like whatever the situation is, I try to give them at least 3 options of what to do. And I'll be like, and if you don't like any of those options, I mean, if you have any random idea, no idea is stupid. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Throw it out there, even if it's not even part of the rules. Like, let's chat.
Yeah, that's exciting for a dungeon master. Let's see what we can do. I also noticed that you ask questions that make, like when they do an action, you ask them the questions about, well, what does that look like? Yes. What does the other party see? And I love that. That's a tactic that Greg Tito did when he was DMing for myself and some new people, and that he was, doing that as a way to help them get into like the role play part of it. But I've been playing spellcasters for years and nobody has ever asked me what it looks like when I cast a fireball or something. And it was so cool. Yeah.
Like my fire is green, just so everybody knows.
Just so you know. Yeah. Like what does it look like when you cast Burning Hands?
Oh no, I have a toddler running.
Oh, hi. It happens all the time. I usually have one. He's at the doctor right now. Otherwise, he would be here too. Not a toddler, though. Oh. Well, I mean, that's probably a good spot for us to start wrapping up. Do you have any other tips for dungeon masters on cohesion and safe spaces and making players feel included? There's so much good stuff here. But I know you took notes.
Yeah, just being really receptive to what they're talking about, what they're wanting to do. I mean, you can, as a dungeon master, you have access to your players' character sheets. And most of the time, they also give you access to their backstory information, separate in a Word document or something.
Yeah.
And just sitting down and trying to find ways that they might not be able to see this like teamwork connection or things like that, and kind of helping weave those threads and then bringing that up in session or connecting them into the story in those ways as well, because once something from their backstory or things like that comes up in session, they're more invested. And then if it also is connected to this character, they're more invested. And then they're like, oh, we've got this thing that we got to work together on. And
yeah. I see it. Amazing. I would love to have you come back and talk more about being a therapeutic dungeon master and the work that you do with kids, but we'll save that for another time. In the meantime, where can people find you and learn more about the work that you do and what other projects that you have? And I mean, who does not want this feminist reimagining of Curse of Strahd? So we definitely need to plug that as well.
So yeah, you can find me anywhere at It's Beth the Bard. So like on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the socials. I think there's so many socials, but it's the same one for all of them. And then I also have a website that's just beththebard.com, where I'm trying to keep everything organized in one spot for easy reference and collaboration. I love collaborating with people. So like reach out to me. Just do it.
Awesome. Well, hopefully people will, because you have a lot of great experience and great advice, and just you're hugely talented. So I am excited to have you, and I appreciate you taking the time to be my guest here and help inspire other dungeon masters.
Thanks again for having me.
Anytime. And I mean that, anytime.